So, what do you do? How many people have been asked this question before? What do you do? What do you say when you're asked this question?
Go to school.
Yeah, so you say you're a student, right?
Yeah.
Who else? What do you do? Who's been asked this question?
I work.
Where?
Strata Center.
Strata Center. Okay. So the question is, what do you do? And when people, yeah, right? I spell well. When people ask this question, it's like, well, I go on Craigslist and I looked at missed connections. What do you do? You ever do that? Go on Craigslist and like saw you in aisle 19 at Publix. You were carrying the spaghetti really well. Want to hook up sometime? You guys ever do that?
Yeah.
No?
Yes.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Missed connections, Craigslist. You know, I sit at home on Friday nights and I'm like, let's see who's having a rough week, right? Craigslist. How do you answer that question, what do you do, right? Well, the way our society has been put together, we have all these baby boomers around, right? And they ask us questions about what do we do. And we say things like, well, I'm a student, or I work, and we're so attached to this sort of answer, right? So I thought for today's talk, what I would do is answer this question of what do you do, and put it in a couple of different contexts. What do you do, and what do you do, and what do you do? What? So first, let's take a look at the answer I give people when they ask, what do you do? I am a professor. So I went to school in undergrad, and I couldn't get enough of it, so I went to graduate school. And then after that, I went to school for my doctorate. And so here I am. I'm a doctor who teaches at the university, but there's a point that I'm getting at with this, and it's this. So, I'm out with a new group of friends, right? And they're predominantly women. And you ask them, you know, what do they do for work? And then they ask me, well, what do you do? And so I say, well, I'm a professor and I work at the local university. What do you think the first question is from that group of women when you tell them what you do?
What else do you teach? What do you teach? Where?
Have any of your students asked you out? That's the first question, hands down, when I tell a group of women what I do. Do you believe that? Yeah, especially this one right here, right? Yeah. But when you're with a group of guys that you don't know very well, and they ask you, what do you do? And I tell them I'm a professor at the university. What do you think the first question is that they ask me?
Have you hooked up with any?
Have you ever hooked up with a student? First question, hands down. So the question becomes gender, right? What do you do when you're asked awkward questions? And so for today's talk about context and what do you do, I thought we would start with a few stories. So the purpose of these stories, you'll see in a second, has to do with context, communication, and relationships. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today, is context, communication, and relationships. Specifically, how these can affect your relationships that you have with others, or the organization in which you might work, whether it's your fraternity, a sorority, student government, etc. To increase your relationship value, whether it's in a personal relationship with your girlfriend, or it's with the sisters of your sorority, or the brothers of your fraternity, one of the things that you have to pay attention to when dealing with these folks is what? Context! That's right, because you don't want to get stuck in one of those what do you do moments. So let's go back and take a look at first the example about the creepy guy in the back of the room, okay? What do you think was most wrong about how he went about that speech?
He came right out and said it.
Okay, he came right out and said it.
He didn't know who his audience was.
He didn't know who his audience was, and at that school, lots of women in the class. It was like awkward. Yeah.
People already thought he was creepy to begin with.
Yeah, and he probably didn't realize himself that he was creepy, because you never quite know when you're the creeper, right? One of the major things that was wrong with that was context. If you have to give a message to someone that's negative, where is a not good time to do this? Chapter in front of who?
Other people.
In front of other people. Have you guys been out and about with a group of friends where one partner criticizes another partner in front of everyone? Yeah. Awkward, right? What do you do? And you guys are sitting around going, somebody's going to get it when they get home, right? Yeah. And And so the first thing that you want to pay attention to is context. So when you're discussing important things with important people, context is the number one thing that you want to pay attention to. Let's go to the girl on the cruise ship. What do you think was probably wrong with her delivery of the B+ message?
She was on you. She was on you.
Yeah, she was on me. Probably not good, right? What else?
She didn't introduce herself.
She didn't introduce herself. Probably bad.
Like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. And what did we say went with food on the Lido deck?
Booze.
Drinking or booze. In this case, we've got to take a look at the sender. If you're the sender of an important message, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's in your fraternity or sorority or organization, you have to think about yourself in the context of how will I look when I deliver this message? Is this message important enough that I can take a look at myself in order to have the most impact when I deliver the message, right? And so the third thing you want to take a look at when you are delivering important messages within your relationships and organizations is the receiver, okay? And the receiver is important in your message. Why? It's how the message is perceived. And in all three of these cases, the message was perceived almost in an incorrect way compared to how the message was intended, right? How was the message intended in the first guy? Probably to be funny, right? Or to teach us something new.
Never mind.
Topic you can't beat, right? How is the message intended in the second example?
Like a thank you.
No, you gave me a B+, you know. Okay, awkward, right? And the third, how is the message intended? Probably.
See you at the class.
Innocent.
Yeah, innocent. Everyone loves cupcakes, right? Oh, that was kind of creepy. Yeah? So the important thing to pay attention to in these three examples, and examples as they pertain to your roles in relationships, organizations, and any other time that you are working with people, is the message, who's sending it, how it's received and perceived, and the context in which you're sending the message. So, have you guys heard about this? Right? How do you talk to girls versus how do you talk to guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something to pay attention to with gender is that women engage in something that's called rapport talk. The rapport that they build in their relationships tends to affect how the message is sent. Well, would this affect how you act in your gender role in the organization in which you work? If you're a sorority president and you're working with a whole bunch of girls, isn't the way you react and act in certain communication situations going to change versus how you act in a mixed crowd? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Because the context in which you're operating. How about guys? Guys engage in what sort of talk?
I don't know.
Ego?
Direct.
Ego, direct. Direct is right, and it's called report talk. So now you've got rapport versus report. What's report talk?
Give the facts.
Quick and to the point, just the facts, ma'am. And studies have shown that men engage in more of this reporting when they talk. Women might say things like, hey, what did you think about the show tonight as something to do? And you say, I didn't.
Okay.
Okay? It's awkward. And so one of the things you want to pay attention to when you're dealing with sort of communication in men is it report talk? So are you getting to the point? And a lot of times when you read books on this or you go to training seminars for sorority leadership, fraternity leadership, something like that, you might come up with this whole joke about how women don't really say what they mean and men don't really understand women and men are from Mars and women are from Venus, right? You've heard all this? But I think what's important is if you keep in mind the context in which you're operating, then the context will dictate the gender of which you're speaking. And so that context will help dictate what? The message. And if you are the sender of the message, then you will make sure the message is perceived as best as it can be by the person in which it's intended for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the question comes up, what do you do? What do you do? And why is it important to know what to do in awkward situations? Do I have any deans or associate deans or quasi-deans or anyone who wants to be a dean? What? They're at the bar too, hiding from the graduate students, right? Yeah, so, okay, I just wanted to get an idea of that. Now, I want a wild round of applause if you're someone that touches students on a day-to-day basis, in a good way, all right? Woo! Good. So what we're going to do today, and I didn't mean that to come out that way, but in the appropriate way, right? What you're here today, hopefully for, is to talk about teaching immediacy, communication, connecting with students, and problems with barriers that we might have. And so the reason why I asked who you are specifically is it seems we have a lot of teachers with us. And so no matter your discipline or where you're coming from, 2-year, 4-year, you can probably, hopefully, get some things out of the talk that we have going on today. So that was my purpose in asking. So we'll start with a few hooks. This is a Facebook page for Bill Gates, and it says, Bill Gates just bought Azerbaijan. Bill Gates and Ashton Kutcher are now friends. Bill is now a fan of Tool Academy and Project Runway. Steve Jobs writes on Bill Gates' wall, remember that OS you made that was so awesome? Yeah, neither do I. Operating system. Steve Wozniak likes that. That's the guy who helped Steve Jobs. And then Bill Gates, I'll mention that to the 89% market share that I had. By the way, I saw that new iPod Shuffle. It looks like a tampon. So keep this in mind, not the tampon part, but keep this in mind for a few minutes, all right? And what we're going to talk about in just a second with technology is that when I do research in this area, if there's a certain date on it, I just throw it out all together, right? It's kind of like when you're doing, anybody technology literacy people? Any technology librarians? When you see certain things with pictures of cell phones that are this big, I throw it out. It doesn't mean anything to me. When I see research that quotes MySpace, I throw it out. It doesn't mean anything to me, right? Have you tried to log into MySpace lately? No. So it doesn't mean anything to advance the body of knowledge. Now, the communication research, on the other hand, if anybody's ever taught a communication course, a public speaking class, or a general interpersonal class, that hasn't changed for 2,000 years. Sender, receiver, message channel, etc. So that's why we can get away with the sort of 81 Mikrowski citation, but a 2010 Lavin. All right? So keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about the favorite thing that there is to talk about with everybody at this conference, and that's the millennial, or the net generation, Generation Me. I think Howard Strauss called them, the millennials go to college, whatever, right? We don't need to hammer this anymore. But what I do want is, what do we know about the millennial, and as many characteristics as you can yell out. Yell out, okay? So, think about the millennial, think about how we describe them at a conference like this, or how the body of literature describes them, whether it's stereotypical or not. And that's something to keep in mind when you talk about this generation, okay? Go!
Distracted.
Distracted.
Sheltered.
Sheltered.
Overconfident.
Overconfident.
Connected to people they care about.
Connected people care about. Yeah, more positive ones.
Multitasker.
Multitaskers.
Family-oriented.
Family-oriented.
Relational.
Relational.
Computer-savvy.
Technology. Tech-savvy.
Service-oriented.
Service-oriented.
Sleep-deprived.
Sleep-deprived. What does that negate from the literature we just saw with technology and the millennials? All of it. Yeah. So if you're trying to connect with them, you don't have to be the next Bill Gates, like on the Facebook page. But you should not show them your weakness. I would keep it to yourself. So the major question I want to end the session with is, and I don't have the answer for this one, Gene, so. But my major question is this, and I want you to think about this at dinner or on your plane ride home, because I don't know what the answer is, and it's sort of the foundation for some of my research is, are we competing with the cell phone, the Facebook, or the laptop for immediacy? The actual thing? Or are we competing with the person on the other end of the cell phone, laptop, or Facebook?